Happy Friday, everybody. Hope it's been a grand week and looking forward to an awesome weekend. All right, tons of just low friction news to rip into today. Updates on a whole bunch of fun things, so let's rip into it. Alrighty, first one, I just want to quickly revisit the arcade media correction from last week. Had some great comments and input overall with regards to last week's video, and in particular that section. Some of the comments were, I guess, taking a sort of a different stance or counter stance to what I had put forward in the correction, saying that I had missed the mark or misunderstood what they were trying to put across. It didn't come across to them at all like how I, was, I guess, correcting them on, and that really, yes, it is a stupid purchase for, the average Joe going off a flat bar, bike to their next bike to go and spend hundreds of dollars on a fully optimized race chain. So I just wanted to, and this is not, I guess, a rebuttal as such, because if the Cade Media information came across to you differently to how it came across to me, at the end of the day, that to a large degree is expected. If 10,000 people listen to a particular podcast or episode, information that's portrayed in that may be perceived or understood differently by the people. We're different people. Just wanted to clarify on that though, that to me, still, no matter which way they're kind of pitching it, either for a very recreational cyclist or for an avid racer, they are in both ways incorrect. For a start, I've never seen a case yet of just your average Joe who's not racing and has no interest in racing being tempted to spend hundreds of dollars on a fully optimized race chain. It's just not something that triggers their radar. That would be a stupid purchase, and it's just one of those things that I don't think in reality really happens. If you don't care about your speed and you've just jumped off a $500 flat bar and now you're on a $1,500 bike of which you have no interest at all in racing or being competitive, why would you go and spend hundreds of dollars on a fully optimized race chain? And I don't think any responsible person at a bike store is going to be trying to sell you one of those either. It would just be a weird conversation to have. For those that do actually race, again, they are incorrect that it's a stupid upgrade, because it's actually one of the best upgrades. You can save, sometimes an easy handful of watts going to a fully optimized race chain. And it's not something that you just buy and run for a race and then that's done. A race chain for most is a very long-term relationship, because depending on how long the race is, you might get 2 or 3 races out of the original treatment to begin with, and then you can retreat it. So you can either do that at home by giving it a re-wax or re-lubing it with something like Ceramic Speed's UFO drip. Or if you want to keep it absolutely as fast as possible, there are options to usually sort of send that back to the original place to have it re-optimized. That's not that widespread, but with some places that's an option. But overall, just retreating at home via either just re-waxing or a top fast wax strip lube, you then get more races out of that. And then after, say, maybe 5 rounds of retreating that yourself at home, some contamination starting to build up, even though it's on one of the top wax options or top wax strips, then there are easy instructions with regards to how to clean and reset your chain and basically get it refreshed and retreat again with your wax or wax strip. So most people will actually, because a lot of the initial work is done with that initial break-in and ultrasonic cleaning and original treatment, you have a really fast chain and you keep that as a dedicated race chain, and retreating that, most people will get at least around sort of 1,500 kilometers or so out of their race chain just simply by retreating it, potentially with that deep clean in between. And it's used for their, just as their race chain. And then after it's had a great life as a dedicated race chain, and if they're getting 1,500 kilometers of racing, for a lot of people, that's 1 to 2 years of using that chain as their race chain. Then that chain moves over to be their next training chain. And it has a great sort of second life, being ridden up to the 0.5% wear mark from there. So it's a purchase that is a long-term relationship and gives you a great, very fast chain for a lot of racing, and then it's your training chain. It's something that is I don't think in the category of a stupid purchase. So again, their thinking on race chains is just very different, I think, to what the normal person would do when they've just spent hundreds of dollars on a chain, which is, this is going to be my lovely chain for racing and I'm going to look after it. If you recall, in that video, they said that, look, it's all going to be pretty much wasted in short order because it's just going to get dirty and go rusty. And so what they're thinking people do with a race chain, I believe, is just not the reality for really anyone who's actually spending their hard-earned money on buying a race chain. They're going to look after it and they're going to have a great time from it for a long time. So yeah, I don't want to say that obviously, I'm right, you're wrong if it came across differently to you. I just wanted to clarify, I guess, my sort of deeper thinking thoughts on the realities of race chain purchases. I just don't think they are applicable and come into the conversation at all to the average Joe. And I don't think that what they stated will typically happen with them is what happens at all to most people who actually race and who purchase a race chain. And just while we're here talking about such fun things, on the famous Zero Friction Cycling website, in the instructions tab, there is a ultrasonic and race chain guide, which takes people through how to make their own race chain to begin with. So how to best do the initial break-in and clean and prep that chain to be a dedicated race chain, as well as just simply how to re-optimize that race chain so that they have a race chain that will be a super fast chain for racing for many, many, many races. And yeah, typically for most, it's literally a 1 to 2 year thing. So we've got all the options there. And if people miss that one, we also have a chain maintenance guide. And this covers basically on-bike and off-bike chain maintenance, whether you are using an immersive wax or a wax drip lubricant, or using wax and wax drip lubricant, or one of the more oily type wax drip lubricants or wet lubricants. And this guide also covers options for a perfect reset, and so that would also help cover those that are looking for their chain to go back to basically as fast as is possible. So we're trying to cover that off for, basically the easiest way for people to ensure they are on the fastest chain if they are racing, or just, of course, general awesome maintenance no matter what type of lubricant they are using and whether they prefer to do that maintenance on bike or off bike. Here, in the instructions tab, you'll also find a chain prep guide which covers prepping your chain new with factory grease using either one of the fancy solvents like DT Clean or Silka's Chain Stripper or Silka's Strip Chip, with what I believe, I guess, the updated improved instructions to factor in the little bit of extra time for the temperature drop and the wax to get up to temp, as opposed to Silka's instructions, which I think they will update, but not sure yet. The prep guide covers all the main options there, as well as with the traditional solvent clean, and then options to do on bike if taking the chain off to prep is not for you, and also a guide for doing with existing chains. So the instructions tab on the Zero Friction Cycling website is just an amazing place to be. I wonder if I can get that to show up on my little screen here. Let's have a look at all that amazing stuff that is in the instructions tab. What a place to hang out over coffee. You may remember also there is a Masterlink compatibility guide. 10 and 11 speed are pretty easy, 12 speed is where it gets fun. And this will be kept relatively sort of fluid and updated where we can, but it covers most options at the moment, because 12 speed is quite a mess of different standards and recommendations. But that's in there as well in case you are ever unsure. So yeah, that bit of an insight. There's a whole lot of actual detail to be found there, as deep or as surface level really as you wish to go. So the guides that I have in the instructions tab, you'll often notice that for some there are the concise guides, which are just those flowcharts, and then there are deeper guides if you want some, really nerd out on going to that next level. So you'll find they're there for like chain prep and chain maintenance and so on. So yeah, there's I think a better level of information to be found there than most places that you will find selling chains and chain lubricants. And that information is born from a heck of a lot of testing and experience and what, is actually happening in the real world versus, I think, sometimes some content is not done as well as it should be. Alrighty, this one's not a correction, just a little bit of an expansion to an answer that I saw on a GCN tech vid, just with regards to chain losses on chain line angles. I'll play that question in a sec, but whilst I'm here, I might as well, you can see there in the background, Kitty, our lovely Tibetan Mastiff. So she's locked in here with me today because we have trades on site and she takes her guarding very seriously. So she's stuck in here with me as opposed to eating tradesmen, which she would likely prefer to be doing at the moment. However, she is a most beautiful Tibetan Mastiff. You can't tell from the camera, but you would not believe how luxuriously soft her fur is. It's like she's gone to a salon each day. However, she is about to be starting her epic molt. So yeah, we've two Tibetan Mastiffs, one a black color, and then the lovely golden of Kitty, our pretend lion in the background. They do go through quite an epic molt from winter to summer, and that has just begun. And so we will have the hardest working Dyson vacuum cleaners in Adelaide coming up fairly shortly. Anyway, to the GCN tech vid, but there she is making her cameo appearance.
It's from Broccoli Wobbles, who says, how many watts is it costing me when cross-chaining? Well, this is similar to the last question.
Yeah.
Well, Friction Facts, and then subsequently it was acquired by Ceramic Speed, did a load of testing on this a few years back. And it's probably not as much as what you think. So I remember they did it with 11-speed drivetrain, which is what most people have, but it's going to be similar results for 12-speed. And they found that the point at which you should change on your cassette is sort of 3 on your front derailleur, is basically 3 in either sort of side. So you get to the 8th sprocket up the cassette, you should then go into the little ring at the front. If you didn't do that, the difference was found to be less than a watt, though. Like less than a watt.
That's less than I was expecting.
So if you're in big, or if you're in the small ring and the big ring, the difference in efficiency is less than a watt. What was interesting, I remember from this, was that there was a much bigger difference. The worst gear you can be in, according to this data, was smally smalls.
Yeah.
So if you're in the little chain ring and then you're little 11 tooth,
inefficient.
That was like, I think that was in the region of about 3 or 4 watts you were losing.
That doesn't surprise me based on what we know about chainring sizes and sprocket sizes. But
all right, how good is it that they actually correctly have the information from the Friction Facts testing? So that is absolutely right from the testing that Jason Smith did. And this was using a 5339 chainring set and an 11 to 28 cassette. So what would have been, I guess, at the time, pretty normal chain rings and a normal chain line system. Where I just wish to, I guess, expand on that information is that some others, like Silka, have done a lot of testing as part of, obviously chain efficiency and losses and so on. And their testing has actually shown there can be up to 7 watts lost on cross chaining, and it can easily get into the sort of the 3 to 4 watt mark, even if you're in the big chain ring. There are some other, I guess, extra bits of information that come into play that's worth knowing about. So first up, since that testing was conducted, which was quite some years ago now, must be, I think, at least 8 years ago, there's been a general trend for much larger ranges. So bigger chain rings, bigger cogs at the back, be that road bike, where some are running, 54, 56, or even larger sometimes for time trial chain rings, to wider range cassettes going up to 1134, even just for professional road racing, and a lot of one-by systems for especially really gravel, where the sort of higher speeds are desired versus mountain bike. People are pushing the size of things, so they could be running a mullet setup where they have a 10 to 52 tooth cassette on the back, paired to a 42, 44, 46 chainring on the front. So we have a couple of overall, there's a lot of teeth in the system when you're running the biggest cog to the chainring, and the larger the cog and the larger the chainring size, this may and often does make the chainline angle more extreme. I'll pull up a couple of images because this is something that sometimes people do still argue with me against, but they are incorrect, and it is a test they can do themselves. All right, just a quick Google. Credit to Bike Radar for this image that just came up. So we can see here, this is a nice big chainring, so this demonstrates things nicely. So some people do believe that chainrings and cog sizes don't affect your chain line because the chains leave from the center line of your chainring and cassette, or your cog, and that is, as we can see, not correct. The larger diameter will hang on to the chain for longer because the teeth are going to be still embedded in links for a longer time with a larger radius. So that's the approximate sort of center line there. And I'm just drawing it down the bottom here because the top is covered by the chain guide, but obviously it's going to be the same because it's a circle. So we can see it is still, the chain is held in place by that tooth there, it is still held in place by that tooth there, it is still held in place by that tooth there, and for a time it is still held in place by that tooth there. So there are basically 4 teeth beyond the center line that are going to hold that chain from being able to start its lateral flex across to the cassette. So that distance has been shortened by basically 4 by 12.7 millimeter. And that can have a substantial impact on your chainline angle, most especially when we're talking about a large cog. So now this is a mountain bike one, so obviously it's not going to be the same as with road. However, we can see the same thing is occurring. There is basically the center line of the largest cog, and it's held by that one, and it's held by that tooth there, and it's held by that tooth there. So I might have drawn that one on the same place, potentially held by that tooth there, or round that off to 3. So it's basically being held in place by sort of 3 teeth before it can start its own lateral flex across to the chainring. So that would be shortening the chain line by basically 3 links of 12.7 millimeter. Now, you're not generally going to run a 64 tooth chainring to a 52 tooth cog. However, as I was saying before, sometimes people are running relatively big chainrings to relatively big cogs. Now that can be gravel with, say, a 44 or 46 tooth chainring to a 52 tooth cog, or it could be on a road situation where somebody's got a 56 to 64 tooth chainring to a potentially 34 tooth cog. Overall, there's a lot of teeth in the system. The chain is not necessarily able to leave as soon as we would like it. It's going to be held in place by anywhere between really 2 to 4 teeth beyond center line, shortening that the chain line angle in your big combination. Now, especially also factoring in that bikes' chain stays are not all the same length. Some are longer, some are shorter, and yet again, even things like 5 or 10 mil can make a difference, because we can have a situation where a whole lot of stuff is coming into play between the chainstay length, the size of the chainring, and the size of the cog you're running, as well as even the chainring stance, depending on your crank and bottom bracket setup, which can vary, generally not by much, but in some cases even millimeters count, where final chainline angles for one system versus another, things can actually be quite extreme, and extreme such that running it in your biggest cog can actually have things running quite horrifically and extremely high loss, to other systems where running it in your largest cog can be smooth as silk. The tipping point is basically going to be, all derailleur chains have, let's see if I can demonstrate this on camera, they obviously have a amount of lateral flexibility because they need to run on different chainline angles depending on your cog. So there is a built-in amount of lateral flex into every link. Now, within that lateral flex, if it remains within that, things are going to run lovely. And that's going to be your, sort of 1 watt, sub 1 watt loss type scenario for going big. However, once you have reached the chain's lateral flex limit, if your chain line angle is pushing it past that lateral flex limit, things will get bad and your losses will increase quite rapidly. 2 watts, 3 watts, and as I said, Silker have tested up to 7 watts loss for running, the most extreme chainline angles. That is quite substantial. And there's another penalty that can occur. You are basically going to be placing an enormous amount of lateral stress onto the rivets of your pins. And especially over time, that can lead to fatigue stress and cracking. And I guess chain fails are overall very rare. However, a way to try to increase the risk of having a chain failure is to be riding with an extreme chainline angle, loading up those the pin rivets, because what's happening on those angles is at the end of the day, your teeth on the chainring, especially, it's trying to pry that outer link off the pin, because there's a huge amount of side load pressure that's being put on there. So every time it's coming around, you're putting a fair amount of pressure in, trying to pry that outer link off the pin rivet, and eventually you may succeed. So normally you can feel it. So if you have exceeded the lateral flexibility of your chain, especially by a bit, you normally will be able to feel that, wow, when I put it into the biggest cog especially, it's a drag and it's just not running smooth. If unsure, get a good bike mechanic to check it out, and they will normally be able to assess it. Like, yeah, we can tell, like, that chainline angle and that amount of sort of side stress, it's really not great, and explore some options to try to improve that. So literally sometimes, and really this comes up more for sort of pushing the 1x systems. Often with 2x, if you're running a really big ring, it is just simply you can't go too far up the cassette because things will just go bad. Things such as using cassette shims to shim the cassette more outboard towards the frame. If there's usually 2-3 mil of room within the, clearance between your cassette and the frame to shim it outboard a little bit. Remove a spacer or two if there are, sort of some in there on the drive side on your crank to get the chain rings closer to the frame. If there is clearance between your chain rings and the frame to do so, taking note of the fact that you will either want to run a longer spindle on the pedal or some pedal washers if that is possible for your pedal and crank to get your Q factor back centralized. But literally sometimes 2-3 mil on one end, couple of mil on the other end has made things just so much better. Worst case, it can mean you've got to run a little bit smaller at one end or the other, such that it's being let go by a tooth earlier. And again, you'll be amazed how many cases where literally millimeters matter, because it's keeping the chain within tipping point or not within the tipping point of its lateral flexibility. And that's really the point where things are fine or not so fine. Lastly, just purely from a losses perspective, because it's your chain, the faster your chain, the lesser the penalty there is for things such as cross chaining, just normal size pulleys, things like that, smaller rings, smaller cogs, because it's all about obviously the chain articulating under load. The faster the chain is, the less penalty you have for anything not being as optimal, and that just simply includes even if you I like to hang on to the big ring on my road bike, typically, often running a pretty high chainline angle. I have a lovely fast chain, so my penalties for running a chainline angle are going to be very low. The slower your chain is, if you have a black mess of grit running as your chain lubricant, the greater the penalty your losses will be for things such as chainline angles, because all the extra parts coming in under side load when you're doing that are being lubricated by something that's not very low friction. So if somebody, if rider A has a 4 watt loss chain and rider B has an 8 watt loss chain, at 250 watt load, rider B is going to experience greater penalties for running higher chainline angles. And that's hopefully sort of, fairly obvious and logical. This goes the other way. So sometimes we get asked about, oversized pulley wheel systems and so on, and the claim what's savings for those. It's never open or explicit as to how the manufacturers of oversized pulley wheel systems test and arrive at their what savings they go to marketing with. But it is unlikely they are on, like a fully optimized race chain. It is usually fairly common for oversized pulley wheel systems to claim sort of somewhere between, say, 1.5 to 3 watts of friction savings by running bigger pulley wheels than standard. If you have a 3 watt loss chain, it's unlikely you're going to save 1.5 to 3 watts from your pulley wheels. if you have an 8 to 10 to 12 watt loss chain, which is actually pretty common out there in the real world because of what most people just throw on their chain and the level of maintenance that goes with that, then, sure. There's some potentially decent savings from an oversized pulley wheel system. However, it should just take care of the chain first. And that's a really marginal pimp gain if one wants to go that way. So it does work both ways. There are going to be lesser savings if you have taken care of the chain and your lubricant by going to something like an oversized pulley wheel system. But there's also a lesser penalty for doing things like hanging on to the big chain ring up power climbs and so on. Okay, now again, I want to stress this is just a modeled scenario to demonstrate a difference in point. All right, let's have a look at, say, drip lubricant. Assuming that we are going to be re-lubricating the chain every 300 kilometers, and that within each interval here, so within each 300 kilometer interval, during that ride time, the chain has accumulated 0.1 grams of abrasive contamination. The average relube is, for a lot of lubricants, it's actually less than you might think. It's normally only around about 3 mil. So each relube, we are basically putting 3 mil of new lubricant across our chain over the top of whatever is left inside the chain from that cycling. So we can see here, that after the first interval, we're basically putting 3 mil on, and we have 0.1 grams of contamination that we have gathered. Then after the next lot of cycling on that treatment, we are now relubing again after 300 kilometers. We have gathered a further 0.1 grams of contamination during that time. The amount of lubrication in the chain is going to remain fairly static. Aside from excess buildup that can be pressed outside, what's actually running inside is going to remain relatively static. So again, just for modeling purposes and simplicity, we're just going to keep saying that we basically have 3 mil of lubricant running within our chain. So now we're going to have sort of 0.2 grams of contamination within our 3 mil of lubricant in the chain. And that's just going to continue and continue and continue until, if we look at sort of the near the 5,000 kilometer mark, we're basically running sort of 1.7 grams of abrasive contamination within our 3 mil of lubricant. And it's, again, this is modeled just based off typical wear rates, but we've modeled out some stereotypical increase in wear rate based on this increasing amount of contamination to lubrication that is occurring in the chain. And if you've listened to me for a bit, you'll have always sort of, heard me say in the past that, especially for drip lubricant users, chain wear rates are not linear because of the fact that the amount of abrasive contamination, versus your lubricant running in your chain, it increases over time. So in short, what's running inside your chain in the first 1,000 kilometers is not the same as what's running in your chain after 3,000 kilometers. What's running in your chain after that point is going to be more abrasive, and therefore it is going to be wearing your chain at an increasing rate. And this is often what can catch people out, is they check their chain after X amount of time and see that there's not much wear, and then they check the chain again after a similar amount of time to find that it's ripped past the recommended wear mark. They've been caught out by that increased wear rate that's occurring because the lubricant is becoming ever more abrasive. Now, how fast that does or doesn't occur obviously varies a lot depending on what the lubricant is, if you're doing any maintenance to reset, how good is that maintenance, and just lubricant performance obviously is a massive factor. We see some lubricants that become extremely abrasive extremely quickly because they absorb everything that they can like you wouldn't believe, and others that do a very impressive job of resisting absorbing contamination and resist transporting that contamination from outside the chain to inside the chain. Do not be fooled by lubricants that claim that they clean as they lubricate. I get a lot of people that will sort of argue the point that, my lubricant, it's clearing the grit out from inside the chain and moving it to the outside. It's like, well, what's it doing inside to start with? How did it get in there if it has to move it out? And do you not think it's being replaced by fresh grit if it's had to move that other stuff out that was obviously in there due to a particular way that this lubricant's operating? At the end of the day, if it's moving grit out, grit is also getting pumped in. It's a cycle. It is pumping the lubricant around Contamination is going from outside to inside just the same as it's going from inside to outside. Otherwise, there wouldn't be anything inside to move to the outside. Now let's compare that to what is happening with your stereotypical immersive wax. Despite the fact that this would not be the case, because the immersive wax is going to be more contamination resistant than the vast majority of drip lubricants, let's assume for comparison's sake that it is still attracting the same 0.1 grams of abrasive contamination per 300 kilometer interval being cycled. However, when you re-wax a chain as your relube, you'll start off with typically, say, 500 ml of lubricant. You are putting your chain into a bath of 500 ml of 100% lubricant. So you've got 0.1 gram per 500 ml, as opposed to what we saw at the start with drip lube. We're sort of mixing that in with 3 ml. Now, as that goes on, now we can see that the amount is going up by the same. We've sort of now got 0.2 ml, and I'm also factoring in that each re-wax is going to typically take out about 5 grams of wax. So your volume of wax is going to decrease over time from those re-waxes. And so we can see here, by the end, we are basically up to the same 1.7 grams of abrasive contamination. And that's being divided into a volume of 420 ml. So it takes an enormous amount of time for the ratio of contamination to lubrication in your wax pot to remotely approach what is happening with somebody's drip lubricant chain, where they are just reapplying typically around 3 ml of lubricant over the top of whatever's running in there each time. So it's, it's obviously the thing that causes the greatest impact to increased friction over time and increased wear over time. It's just a whole different ball game when you are putting the chain in a bath of hundreds of mil of lubricant each time as your relube, as opposed to putting just a few mil of lube over the top. This is also, I guess, important for those. There are some that, I guess, stress about what's going on with their wax in their wax pot quite a bit, and they do boiling water flush rinses every time, even though they're only riding in dry road conditions and so on, because they want to extend the life of their wax as much as possible. For most, especially for dry road cycling, you really do not have to worry. So little contamination is gathered during your normal dry road rides, and you have hundreds of mil of lubricant that you're putting your chain into. It takes a very long time for your wax, I guess the amount of abrasive contamination in there, to start to become an issue at all. Most especially when you compare it to what you were likely doing for a long time before you moved to wax. Right, we can see just modeled assumptive wear rates based on that. Sorry, wobbly hand. This is based on a chain wear lifespan of 10,000 kilometers on the wax. And again, that is just very, very conservative. Typically, we are seeing usually around the 10 to 15,000 at least for any decent level chain on immersive waxing. And it can be a lot more than that. We have absolutely seen real world cases of basically on 25,000 kilometers to a genuine 0.5% just normal road riding and normal immersive waxing. So there can be a pretty stark difference. The difference for off-road cycling in favor of immersive waxing is obviously just much more massive again, and so hence it's always quite ironic that that's been the demographic that's so far behind on thinking with chain lubrication, but getting there. But the amount of abrasive contamination gathered versus the amount of lubricant for a lot of just drip lubricants in the world of gravel and mountain bike, things can get real bad real quick. And so each relube, or at least, again, if you're doing the combo approach, use a good wax strip in between and then just do a re-wax every third to fifth lube. Again, it's just such a different ball game for immersive waxing. So I did put some graphs in, I think, for fun. Almost forgot about those. So we can sort of see there, we sort of modeled out some of those wear rates that we've assumed for the just this modeling for drip versus wax. So by block and then cumulative, and we can see that gap just grow and grow and grow. And again, this is based on very conservative modeling. Anyway, there's more info if you want to have a deeper look at the drip lubricant versus immersive wax. contamination and wear rate modeling. That has been updated and uploaded to the infamous Zero Friction Cycling Instructions tab. So go and have a look if you are interested on your next coffee break. Alrighty, last little updates. I've updated the latest data file for the testing to the website, and that has a new little addition to it, something I should have done a long time ago, and I don't know why I didn't, but it's done now. Let's have a look. So on the main data file there, I have at the top put some very, for me, concise explanations as to what the data means. Yeah, silly me before, I'm a bit special sometimes. Obviously, I covered a whole lot of detail in the test brief, so that was always there if people wish to read, but yeah, obviously a lot of people aren't going to go and click on a link to read a separate document as opposed to just looking at the data and potentially being very confused as to what this means. So this should hopefully help, and then if people wish to go further, then it advises them to go and have a look at the full test brief. But yeah, that should help. So we've got the latest data up there, which includes the finish line stuff. I'm going to be doing a further update to this file when I can. There's been quite a number of, obviously private tests over the year which are not on here. But I'm going to look to include that data, just labeling them private 1, private 2, private 3, and so on, because it will help. I think, it just helps flesh out the league table even further, because test data that gets updated here is being slowed down a bit by the amount of private testing. So just having more data in there, even if we don't know what the products are, still shows the averages, I think better than not including them. It might take me just a little bit because a lot of the tests are also for products in development, and a lot of the products that are, really not the full baked product, I don't think those results should be included because it's not really representative. It's, it is a development product, and so if things went poorly, it can drag certain categories down. So I'm not going to include those. I just need to go through, all the sort of the test run sheets for a lot of previous private tests and look at which ones I should or shouldn't include. And I'll try to get that up for next week if possible. Yeah, the just on the testing, the private testing backlog at the moment, remains pretty bonkers. I have got, I'll need to write it down, currently ongoing and booked 7 immersive waxes for both the full test and the single application longevity tests, 4 drip waxes and 2 wet drip lubricants that we're trying to get through all 3 machines. And we have other testing looking to be booked in, one for potentially for a drivetrain system, and another if we can try to fit in some testing for a rather fancy on-bike waxing machine that you may or may not have seen launched around the Tour de France time. So trying to look at some stuff like that. So conservatively, I've got about 9 months straight of going hard just to get through what's booked in at the moment. And it's, we're doing our best to try to cater for a lot of the manufacturers out there, but things are pretty mega. I will hope that some of that data will be able to be open. Normally, assuming it tests well, the manufacturer will be happy for that data to be open. However, yes, a lot of these, at least a bit over half, are, I guess, products that are either on the market or going to market. They're not just pure development products, and sort of 4 of them are products in development. So yes, at least 5 of these tests we will be able to update onto that main data table, even if they're just labeled as private. Test number X will still be just improving that data table across the variety of sort of, wet lubes and waxes and so on. Even if we don't know the names. So it is all systems go. All right, that'll do. Enough rambling from me. Thank you again for watching all the way to the end if you did. And look forward to your comments and questions as always, and I'll get to them as best as I can. Please subscribe if you enjoy the working information that we do here at Tiny Little ZFC. ZFC between myself, working part-time, and my awesome retail manager, Andrew, working part-time, and my super website, Lady Jill. All of us total to 1 FTE. That is it. So we are a teeny tiny place doing a whole bunch of stuff. I think for 1 FTE, we're doing, we'll give ourselves a little pat on the back just with the amount of work and cool stuff we get through. But yeah, sometimes with things like test updates and so on, and data updates being a little bit behind, yeah, that's why there's basically all total one of us. All right, have a great weekend, everybody, and I look forward to chatting to you on the next one.